Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics video, and today guys I have another quick tip tactical for you. It's time to talk about how the Tallarn can counter the Leagues of Votann. Now, as many of you will be aware, the new Squat Codex looks to be incredibly powerful, and in fact it could be the new top meta faction upon release. And there are lots of people and videos talking about how broken the faction is, moaning and decrying the state of 40k and what it's going to become when these little dwarfy guys start rocking around the meta. But as Imperial Guard players, we know that it is never the time to be moaning, it is never the time to be salty. We need to improvise, adapt and overcome. And that's what I want to do with the videos that I'm going to be creating going forward. And in fact, I've already done one video talking broadly about 3 ways that you can try and counter the Leagues of Votann. If you haven't seen the episode already, I'll link it at the end of this video. And what I want to do today, guys, is drill down further into one of those tips and tactics that I talked about yesterday, but really focus on it from the perspective of the Imperial Guard and talk about how you can really exploit this as an Astra Militarum commander. We're going to be talking about the Tallarn Desert Raiders and how they have a really cool trick that plays directly into one of the Votann weaknesses. And so without further ado, let's crack on with today's video. So the weakness that I talked about in yesterday's video is the fact that the Leagues of Votann really don't have a lot of indirect fire. And what that means is they have to step out into the open. At the very least, they might be in cover, but they're going to have to allow you to draw line of sight to them in order for them to be able to use their guns and draw line of sight against you. Now, that doesn't seem like such a big deal because you're like, oh yeah, but they've got such blistering firepower that yeah, they maybe have to expose themselves and maybe do a little bit of take a little bit of damage, but then they're just going to blast you off the table. Yeah, absolutely, that is going to happen against a lot of Imperial Guard regiments. You know, the Votann are going to march forward with some of their big blocks of infantry. They're going to be powering forward with those big Hecaton land fortresses. And by doing this, they're going to leave themselves open to being damaged. However, they are pretty tough. So the temptation is, okay, well, the enemy's exposed themselves. Let's power forward with our own infantry. Let's power forward with our own Leman Russes. Smash them, do as much damage to them as possible. That's going to work out great for us. But the problem is that the Votann are pretty tough cookies. And if you get into a straight up firefight with them, more often than not, they're going to be able to take that hit and then they're going to start hitting you back even harder. And you're probably going to come out of that firefight worse for wear than they are. And so the name of the game, the ideal situation is that we get to shoot at the Votann without having to expose ourselves and they can't shoot back at us. Now, a lot of people are going to be saying mordianglory. Of course, that means we want to be taking artillery. And whilst that is true, the problem with Guard artillery is that in terms of its damage output, outside of a couple of things, it can be a little bit limited. Sure, you can put full payload on a couple of artillery pieces. In fact, I'd highly recommend you do it in addition to what we're going to be talking about in today's video. But after you've run out of full payload, after you've run out of tank cases, I tend to find that Guard artillery damage really begins to drop off a cliff. I mean, from bitter experience, I will tell you that I don't run Basilisks without full payload. I don't run Manticores without full payload. I just don't think that they're worth their points. And then you start looking at things like Wyverns, which are also really expensive and quite frankly don't have the damage output that they really need. So when it comes to artillery, realistically, you've got a couple of full payload, either Basilisks or Manticores, and then you've got mortars. And mortars are great, don't get me wrong. They're even better when you can take them as Cadian mortars. But the thing is, what I've always found with Guard artillery, including mortars, including full payload things, is I've always referred to it as supplementary firepower. I've always found my artillery is good for picking off or finishing off wounded units, or I have to absolutely concentrate all of it onto one target in order to be able to have an effective amount of damage output. To be honest with you guys, I think we all know this is the case, but tank commanders really are the main damage output for most Imperial Guard armies. I don't leave home without 3 tank commanders. They're such a crutch unit. They're incredibly powerful, and realistically, this is where the majority of our damage is going to come from, not from our artillery. But the problem is, as we mentioned earlier, is that the Votann want to get into a straight-up firefight with you. So if you drive forward your 3 tank commanders, your classic demolisher tank commanders, then realistically what's going to happen is you're going to get a volley off, and then over the course of a turn or two, those Votann are probably going to pick up all 3 of your tank commanders because they've got big old Magna rail cannons, which are, they make the Tau ones look like pop guns. But this is where the Tallarn Desert Raiders come in, because they have the ability to move, shoot, and then move again, and that means that you could hide your Leman Russ tank commander behind a big bit of obscuring terrain, move him out, give the Votann a volley, and then move him back in again, making him completely safe from any return Votann fire. And how they achieve this is with their unique Tallarn tank order, which is called Get Around Behind Them. And the exact wording of the order is, the ordered model can move up to 6 inches in this phase, either before or after it shoots, as if it were the movement phase. This does not affect how far the vehicle has moved for the purposes of determining how many times it can fire its turret weapon as described in the Grinding Advance ability. So what that means is you can move out your Leman Russ from behind that cover, fire, and then give yourself the order, get around behind them, and then actually just get back into that big bit of cover. And if you're playing on a competitive board, you should be able to hide all of your tank commanders from turn 1, and you should be able to draw line of sight onto the Votann as they move into the mid board, onto those middle objectives. Now, realistically, you can actually pull this off with 4 Leman Russes, 3 tank commanders and another regular Leman Russ, because each one of those tank commanders can order themselves to get around behind them. And then if you use the stratagem Inspired Tactics, which allows you to do an additional order, you can also do get around behind them onto another Asher Militarn vehicle, and you're probably going to do that on another Leman Russ. So that means you can have 4 Leman Russes, the majority of them with a 3+ ballistic skill, moving, shooting, and then moving back into cover. That is a blistering amount of firepower which the Votann simply cannot interact with. If you then combine that with the artillery stuff that we mentioned earlier, you're going to have 9 units which are going to be able to pound into the Votann, and they're not going to be able to do a thing back to you. You're going to have the 4 Leman Russes, you're going to have the 2 artillery pieces, and you're going to have your 3 mortar pit units as well. Now, whilst this tactic sounds really good and effective, it does have a few drawbacks, and I just want to make you guys aware of them so that if you decide to implement these Tallarn hit and run tactics, you'll be able to factor in their weaknesses into your game plan and hopefully play through them. Now, one of the first weaknesses is that by taking Tallarn, you don't actually have very many ways of mitigating the random number of shots that you will be generating from many of your Leman Russ turret weapons. In fact, some of the strongest regiment traits traditionally have been things like Tallarn, or one of the custom regiment traits where you take gunnery experts and spot details, because they allow you to re-roll the random shots on your turret weapons, or going something like Cadian and allowing you to do it as well. Because the thing is, there's nothing worse than firing a battle cannon or Demarcher cannon and only getting a double 1, or maybe a 1 and a 2, and that kind of feels like your shooting from the tank commander is then wasted. Now, there are a few ways that you can play around this weakness. The first one being, be careful with what you target. Sure, firing that cannon into a small unit might result in only getting a few shots, but if there's a big unit of Hearthgate Warriors in front of you, maybe holding an objective, don't be afraid to slap that Demarcher cannon, that plasma cannon, or the other random shot weapon into those Hearthgate. By having a minimum squad size of 10, it means that the minimum shots you're going to get each time you fire your weapon is going to be 3. And don't forget, Grinding Advance isn't 2d6 shots, it's D6 shots fired twice, which means that each time you fire that big cannon, you're going to get a minimum of 3. So that's a really good way of playing around it. Also, if you are firing in something like a vehicle, don't forget you have the stratagem Hail of Fire. That Hecaton Land Fortress might not look so scary when it's getting a flat 12 Demarcher cannon shots being thrown into it. Hail of Fire means that when you're using random shot weapons from a Leman Russ and you're firing them into another enemy vehicle, you don't roll the random shots, you just get maximum shots. Don't forget that applies to things like your plasma sponsons as well. So those are a couple of ways by using target priority that you can get around the weakness of having a random number of shots. Another way you can play around this is in the list building phase when it comes to picking what loadouts you want on your Leman Russes. Maybe you don't want to take plasma cannons, maybe you want to be taking multi-melters, or just a good old-fashioned triple heavy bolter. Yeah, the Votann have got void hardened armor, which means that, you know, they're going to be ignoring the AP 1 on those heavy bolters, but they still chuck out a lot of lead, and you can just overwhelm them with Hammer of the Emperor and with lots and lots of Dagger. Speaking of lots of Dagger, when it comes to turret weapons, you could definitely take things like the Punisher cannon, and again, just overwhelm them with a lot of shots. Now, you might be saying to me, but Morning Glory, Puncher Cannons, Multi-Melters, these things have got short range. Yeah, they do, but the Votann tend to have a little bit of a short range as well. Yes, they do have various regiment traits or chat attacks, whatever you want to call it, league traits, league customs, that they can take to add a little bit of range. But by and large, they're not running around with any 48-inch or 72-inch range big guns, you know. And remember, a lot of 40k takes place in the middle of the board. That's where the main primary objectives are going to be. So they're going to be coming to you, and you're going to be able to take advantage of that. So the short range on things like Puncher Cannons and on Multi-Melters won't be quite as big a deal. Another option you could try is you could take the Leman-Russ Exterminator. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be looking at me and going, the Leman-Russ Exterminator, Morning Glory, I thought that wasn't a very good option. Well, traditionally, it's not a very good option, but into Votann and with Tallarn, I think it might actually have a bit of play. Well, it certainly does on paper. You see, it's a flat 8 number of shots, which means that you can reliably put it into anything, and it's going to be able to get a good amount of shots every single time. And it also can be given AP -2 thanks to Weapon Expert. Now, normally, AP -2 isn't such a big deal because you're firing it into things like Marines, which are going to have Armor of Contempt, and they're going to be on cover, so they're going to be running around with a 3-up save most of the time anyway. But the main Votann infantry, the Hearthkin Warriors, only have a 4+ save. So even if they're in cover, you're going to be able to strip them down to that 4+ save. And if you've got a Leman-Russ Exterminator that can just roll out, it's got some plasma cannons on the side, it's got an Exterminator on the top, and it's just going to be dackering away into those big Hearthkin blobs, you could quite easily, with a couple of Leman-Russ tank landers, whittle them down pretty quickly. Now, another weakness you're going to want to be aware of is the Votann do have a stratagem called Reactive Reprisal, which does allow them to shoot at you once you finish shooting at them. Now, firstly, this is after you've finished your attack, so if you've done a lot of damage to them, the enemy might not be inclined to use that stratagem, and don't forget, if they use it, they can't then shoot with that unit in their following turn. They don't get 2 chances to shoot with it. So that's one thing to be aware of. The other thing to be aware of is, and I genuinely don't know how the interaction would work, and it would definitely rely upon a judgment call of a TO at the time, but get around behind them says you get to move after you've shot. So does that mean you get to move out, shoot, and then move back? That's all one activation for you, right? That's all one activation. And that is your step resolved in the shooting phase. And then the opponent gets to use their reactive reprisal. But if you've already moved back into cover, does that mean they can't shoot back at you? Because they can only shoot at the unit if A, it's got a judgment token, and B, if it was the unit that shot at them. I think that's a really interesting interaction, and it would definitely take smarter minds than I to sort of make that judgment call. Personally, I think there's an argument to be made that you get to do everything you want in your activation, and once you've done it, then they get to use their stratagem. As the controlling player's turn, I believe you get to pick the order in which things happen. So if it was me, how I would do it is I go, okay, I'm going to activate this unit in the shooting phase. It's going to be under the influence of the order, get around behind them. This is the steps that happen. It moves out, it shoots, and moves back. It has now finished its attack sequence. My opponent may now choose to use the stratagem. That's how I would see it working, but I think there could definitely be an argument to be made from the other side where someone goes, but how the Votann stratagem works is once you finish making your attacks, there's a pause there. I get to then use my stratagem, and then you get to move under the effects of get around behind them. I can definitely see it from both ways. Realistically, I think it's going to take a judgment call from a TO in the moment, but if there's any other examples of jump, shoot, jump and being able to fire back that you guys are aware of in the competitive scene, let me know down in the comment section below, and then we can pretty much use that as a precedent for how this interaction should work. But that's everything for today. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Do you think that Tallarn are going to be the new anti-meta / anti-Votann regiment out there? Or do you think realistically we're just going to need to rely upon that pure damage output that you get from things like Gunnery Expert, Spot Details, and from things like Cadian? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. My personal thoughts are that maybe we can brute firepower this, but the Votann just seem to have the best guns out there at the moment, so maybe we need to start thinking a little bit more cleverly. But as I always say in the guard, there's no problem that can't be solved by chucking enough Demartia cannons at it. I can see it from both ways, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed today's video, please consider giving it a like. And if you want to see more stuff like this and more tips and ideas on how to beat other meta armies out there, then please subscribe to never miss an episode. If you've really enjoyed today's episode and you want to support me and see more content like this, then please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It is thanks to the very generous support from my channel members, from my patrons, that I'm able to do the Mordy and Glory YouTube channel full time now, which is just absolutely fantastic. So what I want to do is say a big thank you to the latest channel members and Patreon supporters. So a huge thank you to Fick Dick Google, J.A. Burnside, Simon Harris, Jonathan Engelk, James Bull, and Inquisitor Ra, and Jimmy. Thank you guys for doing your part and becoming channel members. I also want to say a big thank you to the latest Patreon support as well. So Big 07 to Waiting for Something to Happen, Nick Hooper, Leo King Art, Alex Hines, KD4, and Dominic Griffin. Thank you guys. I really appreciate your Patreon support. For those that don't know, you get a whole bunch of perks from being a channel member and being a patron, but one of the biggest ones being you get access to the Mordy and Glory Discord. We've got about 400 active Patreons and channel members in there, so it's a really lively community, and you can get loads of painting tips, loads of tactics, and just general memes and good chit chat. So if that sounds like something you want to get involved in, consider signing up to that Mordy and Glory channel. Now, before we go, I want to say a personal, proper, heartfelt thank you to all of my top tier Patreon supporters. These are the war masters, the people that have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty when it comes to supporting my channel. So a big thank you to Navy Veteran, Philip French, Ross Miller, Tequal, Alex Dengal, John Stubbs, Nicholas Walsh, Swordfish Trombone, Diesel Fox, Tom Sutton, and of course, Sly Varney. Massive thank you to every single one of you. You know how much I appreciate your support, but I'm going to say it every video because it is amazing. Thank you so much, guys. I hope you've all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.